G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here, and I'd like to talk about marijuana and madness, and what may be the links between the two, and what causes which, and which causes what. I've been meaning to make this clip for quite a while, but today one of my friends at Refried Bean Dip, very good channel, go and check him out if you like. I can recommend it. Nice bloke. Like myself, he's a hermit. Lives in the forest, only he's in Florida. And he put up a clip today on synthetic drugs. And in Florida, apparently, they've had a bit of a rash of people turning up at hospital casualties right out of their tree, having psychotic episodes after they've smoked stuff called spice, which has been purchased in truck stops in little foil plastic sealed bags with brand names on it, and it's sold as a potpourri. And apparently genuine potpourri has been sprayed with what they would call a synthetic analogue of THC. It's different enough from THC that when an oil rig worker or a mine employee smokes this synthetic analogue, almost not quite pot, they get kind of almost stoned while they're at home, and when they go back to work and they pee in the bottle to get tested before they go back into the fly in, fly out accommodation, this synthetic analogue doesn't actually trip a test for tetrahydrocannabinol. That's what it was developed for by somebody in illicit labs. And because it's a synthetic, it's possible, if you forget to dilute it, it's possible to administer it in concentrations up to 100% weight volume. And I'm guessing that somebody either didn't dilute the solution or dropped their potpourri into a vat of it and stirred it up and then lifted it out with a sieve and dried it. So I suspect a batch has gone through over there, Richard, that's about 5 or 10 times more potent than it should be. And it's been widely understood that if you get the synthetic THC, which is developed by pharmaceutical companies to treat people for their cancerous appetite problems after chemotherapy or whatever, in places where THC is allowed as a medical drug but they don't want people to smoke it. If you give somebody 100% strength of that and give them too much of it, everybody goes psychotic. If you have too much 100% pure THC, it sends you psychotic. It's a transient episode, but it tends to put a lot of people off ever trying pot ever again. So yeah, I suspect what's happened is somebody's failed to dilute the chemical when they were making their spiced up potpourri. But while we're on that topic, we may as well look at marijuana and madness, because there's a lot of brouhaha in the popular press about it. And there's a bunch of people in the medical health industry who like to tell anecdotes, and in medicine, anecdote is not anecdata in the making. You know, you have to actually go and look at a meta survey of all the figures before you can form an opinion. But give them their due. From their perspective, the people who are out there working in the psych wards, you know, the psychiatric nurses and the psychiatrists and the admitting registrars and whatnot, they see a fairly endless stream of teenagers who smoked some strong pot within a year for the first time, and they're having an acute psychotic episode. And it takes them a month or 3 months to pretty much get back to the point where they can be let loose in a supermarket without a keeper again. And afterwards, they may say they like smoking pot, but the more pot somebody who's already had a psychotic episode smokes, the greater their likelihood of having a repeat episode. So yeah, they like smoking pot, but the more pot they smoke, the more likely they are to go mad again. And this is with a madness called schizophrenia, right? So the anecdotes coming out of the individuals who work in the mental health industry is, oh, you should never smoke pot, because I see all these teenagers who have been sent mad by smoking pot, because that is the perception of the people at the front door of the psych hospital. Okay, but the problem with that reasoning is that the incidence of schizophrenia in Western society has been 1% for about 100 years. 50 years ago, 40 years ago, there was a dramatic upsurge in the use of cannabis, and there was no concomitant upsurge in the rate of schizophrenia within society. It just never happened. Truly. Flat line. 1% of humanity in the Western world goes schizophrenic. That's the background rate. The only thing that genetically gives you an increased risk of schizophrenia is, according to King's College London group that I read of their work in New Scientist magazine in about 2009, I think it might have been. Could have been a bit earlier that, 2007, could have been as late as, no, I think 2009 is about it. They studied a human gene called the COMT gene, right, which stands for catechol O-methyltransferase. And I don't have a friggin' clue what COMT actually does when it goes right. But what they say is, if you've got two good copies, one from mummy, one from daddy, that's when you have a 1% chance of going mad, right? If you've got one bad copy, and there are 2 people in 500 who've got one bad copy from mummy or daddy, then you've got 1.5% chance of developing schizophrenia per year from age 15 to age 25, because during those 10 years, that's the years when people actually flip out and become schizophrenic. 15 to 25. If you've got 2 bad copies of the COMT gene, one from mummy and one from daddy, you've got a 3% chance per year of developing schizophrenia during the years 15 to 25. Okay? It's interesting, right? Because everybody at 1% per year over 10 years, you've got a 10% chance. As these people have got, yeah, a higher rate of madness of that particular variety. Now, what these people at King's College London found was that if you got somebody who had one bad copy at age 15 and you give them a joint, instead of having 1.5% per year, they had 15% in 1 year. And if they didn't go mad at the end of a year, they were pretty right. If they had 2 bad copies, instead of having 3% per year for the 10 years, they had a 30% chance of going mad within 12 months of smoking their first joint of strong cannabis. So, some people look at that and they say, oh, well, look, see, it gives you, 10 times the chance of going mad if you smoke it when you're 15. Other people look at it and say, well, it seems that all the people who go mad when they smoke pot when they're 15, they were going to go mad anyway. And maybe it might be more convenient to have them induce a schizophrenic episode with a challenge dose at, say, 14, 15, and treat them for their psychotic episode, and by the time they're 16 they'll be over their psychotic episode, they'll be stabilised on antipsychotics if they need them, and they'll know never to smoke cannabis because they're one of the people who can't handle it. Right? But at those rates, 2 in 500 with 1 bad copy and 1 in 500 with 2 bad copies, it means you'd have to get 1,500 15-year-olds and plug a strong joint into all of them to make sure that you could actually watch one of them go mad within 12 months. I think so. I think that's what the stats break down to. So there's pros and cons, but pretty much it's a ridiculous assertion to say that cannabis sends people mad. It may compress their chances of going mad from 10 years into 1 year, and that may be good or bad depending on your view of psychiatric medicine. Me, I'm just a general nurse, you know. I did a little bit of psychiatry during general training a very long time ago. But I don't think you can say that cannabis sends people mad. Also in New Scientist, in a different article, some other time, some other place, a bunch of people have nailed it down that people who start smoking cannabis early in teenage years and who smoke a lot, they come out the adolescent pipeline missing about 8 points off whatever their IQ would have been if they had not smoked. So if they were going to have an IQ of 100, they're going to come out with an IQ of 92. If they had an IQ of 156, they'll come out with an IQ of 148. Right? I mentioned this to a room full of cannabis smokers in their mid-20s, and one of them looked around and said, yeah, well, you might be 8 points dumber, but, you know, you're considerably more than 8 points happier. The whole room burst out laughing because everybody knew what he meant and they knew that he was right. Now, there are people who suggest that cannabis is wicked and evil because it's a gateway drug, because they know of an anecdote of some sweet young thing who smoked a joint at 13 to 15, and when they were 27 they were a heroin addict dead in a gutter, and therefore smoking pot causes you to die of heroin addiction. That's how they want to look at it, but there's two ways of refuting it. The first one is to say, well, 100% of dead heroin addicts drank milk before they got addicted to heroin. So because drinking milk causes death by heroin addiction, we better ban dairy cows. Surely that'll be working, won't it, fine? The other way of looking at it is to say, yeah, well, okay, so here's this teenage kid who smoked a joint and they've maybe gone and had a psychotic episode and maybe kept on smoking, and maybe they've tried all kinds of other things. And maybe they've finished up on heroin and given themselves so much heroin that they died. The Australian Medical Journal was reported by the Australian Broadcasting Commission on Valentine's Day in 2010 to have published research by the Melbourne University School of Medicine, where they looked at the long-term survival outcomes of children who'd been sexually abused, and they found that they had 18 times the death rate, 18 times, 1,800%, the death rate of suicide, and they had 48 times the death rate of accidental drug overdose, and the deaths clustered around 18 years from the abusive incident. Right, so molest your 2-year-old if you want him to be a dead junkie at 20. That's a charming piece of news to have released on Valentine's Day, but ABC broadcast it for 8 consecutive bulletins and it stuck in my head. You know, I could just recite the figures then. So, if smoking cannabis caused the dead junkie to die of heroin addiction, how did smoking the cannabis as a teenager put them in a time machine and catapult them backwards to when they were 6 so they could be groped by their grandfather or molested by mummy's boyfriend, or whatever it was back then that caused them to be self-medicating as a teenager? So there's a lot of things that happen in cause and effect chains that a traditional knee-jerk snapshot analysis completely misses the point of. So yeah, 1 in 500 chance of making you go mad in 12 months instead of in 10 years. Shave 8% off your IQ, perhaps, if nothing else goes wrong. That's what happens if you smoke pot at an early age and smoke a heap of it. As far as I know. Doesn't send you mad unless you were going to go mad. But if you are mad, it won't stop you from being mad, and it might make you go mad more often. If you're already mad and you smoke pot, them's the facts as I know them at this point in time. If and when I figure out any more, I'll let you know. But yeah, that's pretty much how it's going as far as I know with madness and pot. There is an association, but pot seems to be an effect, not a cause. Not unless you've got 2 bad copies of COMT, and we've discussed that. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Refried bean dip, Richard Mann. Take it easy, brother. Ciao.